Paratroopers of the 101st Airborne Division jumped from airplanes and gliders into German-occupied France.
The sky was full of shadows. One by one they dropped, silent shapes drifting down into the unknown. Below, the earth was already burning.
They had a little over 2 hours, and they were about to go and meet the most dangerous enemy that the United States had ever confronted in combat for the first time.
Somewhere in the dark, a boy became a soldier. A friend took his last breath, and the line between courage and fear vanished.
They landed behind the shores of Utah Beach in the interior of the Cotentin Peninsula.
The 101st Airborne Division wasn't dropped into a battle. They were dropped into a nightmare, a place where maps didn't matter and mercy didn't exist. Behind them, the world waited. Ahead of them, the Waffen SS, and in between, only the will to survive. This is what happened when the Eagles faced the storm. The night before D-Day, they were young, most of them. Some are barely out of school. Some had never seen war, only trained for it in fields that smelled of grass, not blood. But that night in England, everything was different. The air was heavy with silence. Not fear exactly, but something close to it. They sat in hangars and tents, checking gear they had already checked a dozen times. Rifles, harnesses, and boots are too tight. They didn't talk much, not really. A few cracked, quiet jokes, more for themselves than anyone else. Others just stared at the floor, hands twitching against their knees. General Eisenhower walked among them like a father trying to say goodbye without breaking down. No speeches, just small words. A pat on the shoulder, a look that said more than 1,000 orders ever could. Outside, the planes waited, painted with invasion stripes, engines muttering in the dark. The sky above them was still, for now. Some of the men painted their faces, others carved names into helmets or whispered prayers into the cloth of their sleeves. No one knew what would happen once they jumped. They only knew they had to jump. Before boarding, a few men gathered under the wing of a C-47. One of them pulled out a harmonica. The notes were shaky, off-key, but no one minded. For a brief moment, the war felt far away. Then came the call. The engines roared louder. One last glance back, and they were gone, swallowed by the sky, headed for a place that would mark them forever. Dropping into chaos, the engines screamed over the channel, vibrating through metal and bone. Inside the planes, the men stood shoulder to shoulder, strapped in tight, swaying with every bump in the dark. Red lights glowed above them, cold and steady. No one spoke now. There was nothing left to say. Then the flak began. It started like distant thunder. Then came the flashes, white, orange, green, exploding all around them. Some planes rocked violently. Others veered off course. The air was thick with steel and fire. Somewhere, a man yelled. Somewhere else, a plane disappeared into black smoke and never came out the other side. Below, the French countryside waited, quiet, twisting, unfamiliar. At the sound of the green light, they moved without hesitation. One after another, they stepped into the wind, into the dark, into the unknown. Parachutes opened like flowers in a storm. Some floated gently, others never got the chance. The drop zones were supposed to be marked. They weren't. Men landed in flooded fields, tangled in trees, slammed into stone walls, and on rooftops. Some came down alone, their boots sinking into mud beside German patrols. Others hit the ground hard, rifles torn from their grip, landing miles from anyone they knew. Confusion ruled the night. Small groups formed in the shadows. Strangers became squads. Officers were nowhere. Radios didn't work. But still, the soldiers moved, toward gunfire, toward objectives, toward each other. One man had lost his weapon in the jump. He picked up a rock and kept moving. Another was shot as he landed, crawling through grass soaked with more than dew. By dawn, nothing had gone to plan, and yet something strange had happened. The 101st wasn't broken. It was scattered but alive, still fighting, still moving. Somehow, in the worst conditions imaginable, they had not been defeated. Not yet. Fighting through the hedgerows. When the sun finally rose, it didn't bring clarity. Only shadows that shifted in the hedgerows, thick, high walls of earth and brush that turned every field into a trap. The terrain was tight, too tight for tanks, too tight for sight. And somewhere beyond each hedge, someone was waiting with a rifle. The paratroopers moved carefully, crouched low, guns ready. They whispered to each other in clipped tones, trying to make sense of the map that no longer matched the land. Nothing was where it was supposed to be. They weren't just fighting Germans. They were fighting isolation, hunger, doubt. Still, they pushed forward. In one village, a handful of men from different companies cleared out a farmhouse. Inside, They found a wounded comrade who'd been defending the place alone all night. He barely smiled when they reached him. He just said, "Took you long enough." Moments like that gave them something to hold on to. Elsewhere, they encountered resistance, German patrols, snipers hidden in barns, and machine guns mounted at road bends. It wasn't one big battle. It was dozens of small ones, all bloody, all personal. Each field they crossed felt like a coin toss, but slowly the pieces of the 101st came together. Men who had landed in the wrong zones found each other. They regrouped under makeshift leadership, drawn forward by instinct and grit. They weren't supposed to win this way. They were supposed to drop, link up, and march out in formation. Instead, they were clawing their way through hedgerows, fighting inch by inch. And somehow it was working. The Germans had numbers and positions. The Americans had nothing but each other, and it was enough to keep going. The battle for Carentan. They knew the name before they saw the place. Carentan, a quiet town, small on the map but large in importance. Without it, the beachheads couldn't link. Without it, the Allies would be split. The 101st had to take it. But Carentan didn't come easily. The approach was a nightmare. A narrow causeway stretched across a swamp with nowhere to hide. On either side, water and mud. In front of them, dug-in German defenders, well-armed and waiting. Machine guns, mortars, and worse. The first men who stepped onto that road were met with fire so intense it lit the fog. They kept going anyway. Some crawled, some ran, others dropped where they stood and didn't rise again. The road was lined with bodies by mid-morning, but still, the paratroopers pressed on.
Assembling of paratroopers was critical to the success of the Normandy invasion. Paratroopers were tasked with holding strategic points and disrupting any counterattack the Germans might throw at the main Allied force.
Inch by inch, foot by foot. At one farmhouse near the edge of town, they were pinned down for hours. No one could move. The Germans had them zeroed in. Lieutenant Colonel Cole gave the order that no one wanted to hear. Fix bayonets. It was rare by that point in the war, but there was no other way forward. When the smoke from their supporting artillery fell, they charged. Not with firepower, with steel, with grit, with screams that weren't rehearsed. Cole led from the front, a whistle in his mouth, his men charging behind him. The Germans weren't expecting it. They fell back in chaos. Some ran, some didn't have time. The farmhouse was theirs, but the cost was heavy. Too many wounded, too many names that wouldn't go home. Still, they had broken the line. The town was now within reach. Street by street, they pushed in. Room by room. It wasn't quick, it wasn't clean, but by June 11th, the Eagles were in Carentan. The Germans were gone. The bridges were theirs, and the price of that victory would be etched into every man who walked away from it.
Now first, like always, be sure to hit the like button down below. It helps us out tremendously with the reach of this video. Thank you.
The arrival of the Waffen SS. Carentan was taken but not secured. The Germans weren't done, not yet. From the east came a new threat. Hardened, disciplined, unshaken by the chaos that had shattered other units. The Waffen SS had arrived. These weren't conscripts or foreign volunteers. They were elite, fanatical, trained to fight to the last breath. And they had one goal: take Carentan back. The first signs came early. Shells are landing closer. Machine guns are speaking faster. Then came the armor, sleek black silhouettes rolling through the fields, flanked by columns of SS Panzer Grenadiers. The 101st wasn't built to hold towns. They were a strike force, not a garrison, but they didn't flinch. From trenches and shattered buildings, the paratroopers held firm. Each house became a fortress, each window a firing line. There was no fallback plan. For 2 days they endured wave after wave. Bayonets fixed, mortars falling. The SS charged again and again, and every time the line bent but didn't break. Reinforcements arrived just in time. Tanks from the 2nd Armored Division pushed into town, their engines screaming, guns firing without pause. The tide began to shift. By nightfall, the SS withdrew. Not defeated, but bloodied. The 101st had been held. And in holding, they did more than protect a town. They sent a message that even against the most feared soldiers in the German army, The Eagles would not fall. They would not yield. Operation Market Garden, Hell's Highway. By September, the war had changed. The beaches were behind them. France was breaking open. The Germans were retreating, but not running. Then came the next plan, risky, ambitious, a single punch through Holland that could end the war by Christmas. They called it Market Garden. For the 101st Airborne, it meant jumping again. Broad daylight this time. A highway below them, just one road stretching north, lined with bridges, canals, and enemy strongholds. They were to clear and hold a stretch of it, 16 miles of villages, crossings, and exposed asphalt. It would be called Hell's Highway. The drop was perfect. A rare thing, men landed in clusters, weapons in hand, near their objectives. No chaos this time. But the fighting began almost immediately. Every bridge came with resistance. Every stretch of road had Germans hiding on both sides. They'd blow up a span, then ambush the engineers sent to repair it, and always the sound of tanks. Sometimes theirs, often not. Convoys stalled under fire. Trucks burned. Casualties mounted. The corridor was thin. If it broke anywhere, the entire operation would fail, and it nearly did. In towns like Vagel and Sun, the Eagles stood their ground against armored columns, artillery, and waves of infantry. Sometimes they are held by inches, sometimes by trickery, but they held on. They watched supplies burn, watched friends fall, but the road stayed open. Behind them, British tanks moved north. Ahead of them, the path narrowed. And through it all, the 101st fought like a fuse being burned at both ends, never knowing when it would all finally explode. A bridge too far. The plan was always a gamble. Capture the bridges, hold the line, link up the armor, break into Germany before winter. But Arnhem was too far. The British 1st Airborne had landed in the worst place imaginable, surrounded by SS divisions, outnumbered, outgunned, and cut off. Their radios failed, supplies fell into German hands. Reinforcements couldn't reach them. And the 101st could only watch the days slip away. They had done their part. They held the corridor. They bled for every inch of road. But it wasn't enough. The tanks never made it in time. The bridge at Arnhem stood, uncrossed. By the time withdrawal came, only a fraction of the British forces returned. The rest were captured, wounded, or buried beneath the ruins of a town they were never meant to hold. For the Eagles, it was a bitter ending. They had fought with everything they had. They had done the impossible, but the mission failed. No Rhine crossing, no early victory. Still, there was no shame in it. They had proven something else. That courage doesn't always mean triumph. Sometimes it means refusing to break, even when success slips away. And that kind of courage leaves a deeper mark than any line on a map. The island. After Arnhem, there was no glory left, just waterlogged trenches, endless mud, and the cold silence of waiting. The 101st was sent north to hold a 10-mile stretch of land between the Rhine and the Waal. They called it the island, a flat, exposed strip between two rivers. It offered no cover, no comfort, and no rest. Rain turned everything to sludge. The water rose in foxholes faster than they could bail it out. Boots never dried. Socks froze stiff. The wind cut through every layer, but the shelling never stopped. The Germans across the river had a clear view. Day or night, movement drew fire. Artillery, snipers, mortars that screamed like banshees before they hit. Every hour stretched into two. Every day dragged. They buried their dead in shallow graves behind the lines. Replacements arrived without winter gear. Food ran short. Still they stayed. Officers were wounded. Friends disappeared in sudden blasts. Morale thinned like breath in the frost. But no one broke. In the dark, they whispered stories from home. Passed cigarettes. Watched the river. There was no fame waiting here. Only survival. And that somehow was enough. They didn't fight for recognition. Most of them never expected statues or ceremonies. They just wanted to survive. To go home. To see a familiar street, a familiar face, and live in peace, not with medals on their chest, but with silence in their mind. A silence that never quite came. The men of the 101st Airborne dropped into a world torn apart. They landed far from safety, far from certainty, and yet step by step, field by field, they moved forward. Not because they were fearless, but because they had no choice. Because someone else was counting on them too. They endured the worst of war, shattered towns, frozen foxholes, smoke-filled skies, and the constant weight of knowing the next step could be the last. They didn't win every battle, but they never gave up their ground. And when the storm came, when the Waffen SS pressed hard, when bridges burned, when hope thinned, they held. Not for the country, not for fame, for the man beside them. That's how history remembers the Screaming Eagles. Not just as soldiers, but as a brotherhood born in care, bound by duty, and marked by a kind of courage that still echoes long after the guns have gone quiet.